Hello all and welcome to the Diversity Matters event. I would like to introduce this session's speaker, Scott Halliday, who will center his talk on LGBT family law, human rights, and personal experience and advice to others. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks ever so much, Robert. And thanks for the invitation. It's always really nice to do things like this. I have heard the other people speak and they've been very eloquent and given personal accounts and reflections. I'm probably going to talk about something slightly different. I'm going to talk about the fusion, if you like, between your potential practice and what matters to you and or your sort of characteristics and or diversity in some way. I do. Just as a teeny little bit of background. So I'm an associate family law solicitor at Irwin Mitchell. I split my time between London and Leeds, and I usually work on divorce, dissolution, the financial consequences of relationship breakdown, and international law around children predominantly, so abduction law or proposed relocations of children to different countries with one of their parents usually. I initially studied law at the University of York and then studied a master's in international human rights law at York and spent a bit of time studying politics and philosophy for what it's worth in South Korea when I was a lot younger for a summer. I've been at Irwin Mitchell now for, I think it's closer to 6 years than 5 these days. In terms of what I want to talk about, all of the practicing, I particularly have niche expertise in LGBT family law issues, so same-sex divorce, same-sex children law issues. Increasingly, I'm doing a lot of transgender work for trans-identifying children, stroke young people, and parents as well. And I just want to reflect for what it is worth briefly on your diverse characteristic, appreciating that there's an intersectional point that I can't explore now, but whether you're LGBT plus defining and have other characteristics or otherwise. I just want to reflect a little bit on making sure that when you go into the profession, and this won't be for everybody, but when you go into the profession, you make sure that you don't lose your authenticity around you. And so for me, that was explored through doing events, promoting diversity within the profession, but actually also it was more through creating and developing niche expertise about my community, if you like. Okay, now I appreciate, a lot of people don't go into personal legal services. My clients are individuals usually. Okay, and so clearly if you're going off into corporate practice, you're going to potentially struggle, I would suggest, to be able to represent businesses, for example, that don't have a sexual orientation or a gender identity, if you see what I'm saying. But I wanted just to reflect on the importance of emerging areas of law. And so if you're interested in discrimination law, for example, and you have some form of characteristic, some form of protected characteristic, as it were, you can make that your area, if you like. For me, it was LGBT family law, and there's not a lot of people doing that very well. There's not a lot of people who actually do have the language and experience to be able to bring to the table. And what I found was that was an area where there wasn't proper numbers of experts. So look for emerging markets in that regard. But on a more personal level, it was just something I wanted to do, and it was something I was interested in. When I was a postgraduate, my thesis was looking at human rights issues and marriage, and at the time there was no same-sex marriage, so thesis looking at how that might happen. And I guess when I transitioned into practice, that was, that's where it comes from, in that I wanted to continue that and explore that in practice. And so I just wanted to sort of reflect briefly on LGBT family law, human rights, and some of those things, and then we can get into a couple of questions about my area or anything that's pertinent to people if they so wish. But I want to stress that particularly from an LGBT perspective, we're in a real period of flux as individuals. Okay, so I'm not talking about going into the office. I'm talking about just as humans, right? I'm talking about our relationship statuses, our ability to be married, our ability to be, our ability to have children, the different ways that we might have children, the way that the world deals with LGBT people when they separate, or around their children when they separate. Okay, and I just want to sort of suggest to you all that there's something powerful, and it won't be for everybody, but there's something powerful, and it's what drives me in when you're in the profession, whether it's in your, you know, for me it's in my practice area, but it might not be for you, but make sure that you don't lose touch with that element of who you are, because it's invaluable to who you are. And so some things that I do now, I work in, you know, Owen Mitchell's a full service law firm. I think we're the biggest full service firm in the whole country, actually. So we're doing everything: family law, corporate, commercial, probate, you name it, we're probably doing it, or somebody will be doing it in the firm, right? And so that's a big beast, as it were, to permeate, and you don't want to get lost in that. So for me, I guess embraced my diversity or my characteristic and made that something for me. And for people on the call, I don't know, it might be, people may want to think about that. I suspect it's not as easy if you're not a family lawyer, but that's what I'm doing, so that's what I'm going to talk about. I think that's really important, to be honest with you all. I've been doing a lot more public interest work recently. So I do now some pro bono work. And again, you probably won't have the chance to do a great deal of pro bono work per se if you don't position yourself in a firm that has the financial infrastructure, I guess, to be able to do that. You know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with working in a high street firm or a smaller outfit, but chances are they might be more limited because of the realities of profit margins and whatnot. You know, at the end of the day, law firms are commercial entities. But what I want to suggest to those that are interested in any way is, if you can position yourself in a pretty good firm, a pretty chunky firm, if you like, you might be able to develop that. And so now I've done a couple of cases in the High Court and a couple of cases in the Court of Appeal for big LGBT national charities, or some test cases for parents in very difficult circumstances where they may not have the financial recourse to pay privately. But the issue is very important. Like I say, I've got some transgender cases at the moment with transgender parents and transgender children, not all in the same case, they're different cases, but we do those at well, pro bono in one of those cases. And it's really important, and I think it's relevant for today, because I want you all, whether or not you're going to be a family lawyer or not is irrelevant. What I want you all to take away from it, I guess, is whether it's in your practice or whether it's in your wider business development, when you're able to give back, or when you're able to get a seat at the table, as it were, once you're once you're comfortable in your firm, don't forget about the significance of your characteristics and how you're there. And that sounds really corny, but it's really not corny at all. It's very important. You're there on merit, but what I'm trying to say to you is, don't forget that for me, this won't be for everybody, but for me, part of your obligation, I would suggest, is as you grow, you look back and you try and bring other people along with you, and you try and sort of encourage other people who are in a similar position to you, or were in a similar position to you, and try and do that as early as possible, because you'll make great contacts. I've heard other people talk about contacts and building a network, and I want to encourage you all to do that. But I want you to consider trying to build a network, maybe not exclusively, but at least to some extent, through your diverse characteristic, because it will set you apart, and it's a more authentic way of attending events and being involved. All right, so I do quite a lot of business development now, I guess, as I'm getting a bit more senior at the firm, but I try and narrow to specific contacts and specific events that matter to me. And you've got to find those people, and you've got to find those events before you're able to do that, if you see what I'm saying. Okay, so be mindful of that and try and build those networks. And if it feeds into your practice area, great. That won't be for everybody. And look, not all of my clients are LGBT plus defining or having some sort of gender identity legal concern. On the contrary, I'd say maybe a third of my work is that, maybe between a third and a half. But that's important. You want to position yourself, I would suggest, in a firm that will allow you to do that. And even if you can't through your direct practice, like that might be a bit more time working with individuals, but even if you're working in a corporate environment, law, think how you can reach out, think how you can involve yourself in the local legal community, but specifically your local LGBT legal community. And if there isn't one, make one happen. Easier said than done, but be deliberate. Meet people for coffees. Well, if we're ever able to get back into the office and meet for coffees and whatnot, but think of it like that, okay? And build your network. I'm not saying exclusively, but build your network so much as you can or so much as you want to around your diverse characteristic is what I'm suggesting. And like I say, it won't be for everybody, but I think it works for people who see the world in that way. And I think the only thing I would say is, because in the introduction I said I would talk a little bit about human rights. The only reason I'm going to talk about it, and I will only do it, unfortunately, if you're LGBT defining, and this is from a family law perspective, although it's true of other areas of law as well, you're entering into a profession, and presumably to some extent you want to do good, and you want to advise and support people or entities. Unfortunately, from an LGBT plus perspective, the law isn't always going to be in our favor. It still isn't. And I would encourage you to try and think about that as well, actually. And it doesn't matter whether it crosses your practice area or not. Putting on an event in a corporate law firm about something, about a law reform issue. There's a big thing with Stonewall and Pinsent Masons and other firms a couple of years ago about same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland. You know, the reality of it is that's a big corporate law firm getting into a very personal family law issue, but it was fantastically well done. So I'm not saying immediately day one, suddenly turn up to your head of department or partner and ask to put on an LGBT event or try and change the law. But what I'm saying is think about it, because if as LGBT people, you know, if you look in the history books, we can see that different law reform agendas have happened over decades. And when you come into practice, if you're not already in practice, identify that and make something happen. Whether that's an event in your firm, whether you're in a practice area like me where you can fuse the two together, try and contribute and be part of a wider sort of umbrella of people and institutions trying to affect change. But a word of warning, accept that actually you're going to be possibly on the wrong side of history. I mean, I've just come out of the back end of a Court of Appeal case where we lost thing to be involved in, and you know, in 5-10 years time somebody will come along and that law ideally will be reformed, or Parliament will reform it in some way. But the point is, somebody's got to do it the first time round, and unfortunately you'll all be aware from your legal education and whatever else that sometimes actually the law is a pretty difficult beast to maneuver and a difficult way to achieve change, but it's absolutely essential in the wider framework. Okay, so I don't have a great deal more to say, and I'm conscious that I've probably spoken a little bit too long, so I'm going to leave it there. And if there are a couple of questions, by all means, put them in the chat, and I'm more than happy to answer them. But at this stage, I'll probably just leave it there. Okay, but thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Scott, once again. That marks the end of this session. And please visit the main stage to hear the final remarks from Paul McFarlane. Thank you.